The telegram that summoned Lord Peter Wimsey to the Benedictine house of St. Agatha in the Marsh arrived on a Tuesday morning when the London fog had achieved that particular shade of yellow which suggests that Providence is feeling bilious. It was brief, as telegrams from abysses generally are, and cryptic, as communications involving His Majesty's government invariably must be. Sister Scholastica, dead stop circumstances. Peculiar, stop Crown Solicitor. Requests your immediate attendance. Stop Mother Superior Hildegard. Bunter, said his lordship, setting down his coffee cup with the air of a man who has just discovered that his morning paper contains nothing but bad news and advertisements for patent medicines. Do you suppose there is some ecclesiastical protocol governing the use of the word peculiar in official correspondence? It seems rather inadequate for a death, yet rather strong for a minor breach of canonical law. I could not venture an opinion, my lord, though I believe the Benedictines favor precision in their communications. Quite so. Peculiar it is, then, and when the Crown Solicitor requests one's immediate attendance at a convent, one may reasonably assume that Sister Scholastica did not simply expire from an excess of devotional enthusiasm. Wimsey reached for his cigarette case, a gesture that invariably preceded either profound thought or profound boredom. St. Agatha in the Marsh, that's the house near Whitstable, isn't it? The one with the medieval scriptorium and the rather profitable sideline in illuminated prayer books. Indeed, my lord. They are also known to hold certain Crown documents in their archives, not dating from the dissolution period. Ah. The monocle glinted as Wimsey adjusted it thoughtfully. Crown documents, a dead nun, and circumstances described as peculiar. It begins to sound less like a natural death and more like the opening movement of a rather complex symphony in the key of blackmail minor. By noon, the Daimler was threading its way through the Kent marshlands, where spring had arrived with that aggressive cheerfulness which the English countryside affects when it wishes to mock human mortality. St. Agatha's revealed itself gradually. First the Norman bell tower rising above ancient elms, then the grey stone walls that had weathered both Cromwell's enthusiasm and Victoria's architectural improvements with equal stoicism. Mother Superior Hildegard met them at the gatehouse. Is her face bearing that expression of controlled anxiety which Wimsey had learned to associate with intelligent women confronted by unintelligent circumstances? Lord Peter, the Crown Solicitor, said you would come. My dear Mother Superior, when His Majesty's legal representatives and the Benedictine order unite in summoning one, resistance becomes not merely futile but positively unpatriotic. He removed his hat with a slight bow. Now then, Sister Scholastica, found where, when, and in what condition that renders her demise peculiar rather than merely regrettable. The abbess's grip tightened imperceptibly on her rosary. In the scriptorium, my lord, yesterday morning, apparently poisoned, but the door was locked from within, and she was clutching a document that should not have existed. The scriptorium of St. Agatha's occupied the oldest wing of the convent, a barrel-vaulted chamber where Norman builders had created something between a library and a penitential cell. The northern light filtered through lancet windows with that particular quality of illumination which suggests that God prefers His scribes to work by faith rather than sight. The air held the accumulated scents of centuries, oak gall ink, vellum, beeswax, and that distinctive mustiness which develops when pious thoughts are allowed to ferment in inadequate heating. A cheerful spot for contemplating mortality, observed Wimsey, adjusting his monocle as they entered. One sees immediately why medieval monasticism produced so many saints and so few optimists. Two figures awaited them beside the third writing carrel from the entrance. The first was a square, grey-moustached gentleman whose bearing proclaimed him a career civil servant of the more confidential sort. The second, a harried-looking man clutching a medical bag, possessed that expression of professional irritation common to doctors summoned to examine corpses in inconvenient locations. "Lord Peter," grunted the official. Fenton, Treasury Solicitor's Office. We've had dealings over that Admiralty business last spring. Ah, yes, where the gentleman shot himself before quite deciding whether he meant to, murmured Whimsy. Dr. Mathers, I presume? He added, extending his hand to the medical man. Indeed. And I can tell you immediately. Strychnine poisoning, classical presentation, muscular convulsions, rhesus sardonicus, death within 30 to 40 minutes of ingestion. Most unpleasant way to go, particularly for a woman of her age. Whimsy surveyed the scene with that deceptive languor which generally preceded his most acute observations. Sister Scholastica's body had been covered with a linen sheet, but the workspace remained precisely as discovered. The writing desk displayed an almost liturgical orderliness. Quill pen aligned parallel to a bone scraper, inkpot positioned exactly 3 inches from the desk's edge, blotting sand in its proper container. Remarkably tidy for a death in agony, he noted. One would expect overturned inkwells, scattered papers, perhaps a dramatic lunge toward salvation. Instead, everything suggests she paused to arrange her materials before expiring. How very considerate. She was found slumped forward over the desk, supplied Mother Hildegard. Or Sister Mary Joseph discovered the door bolted from within when she brought the morning tea. We required the gardener to force the lock. Whimsy examined the heavy oak door, noting the substantial iron bolt and the fresh splintering where the jamb had surrendered. Most definitive. And in her hand. Fenton's expression tightened perceptibly. A document, parchment, 16th century. It purports to be a private agreement between Henry VIII and the then abbess of this house. A secret concordat guaranteeing St. Agatha's immunity from dissolution in exchange for the nuns serving as custodians of certain sensitive royal correspondence. How deliciously pragmatic, said Whimsy, producing a magnifying glass to examine the desk more closely, Henry promising not to steal the convent's silver in exchange for the good sisters hiding his embarrassing letters. And this document has resided peacefully in your archives for 4 centuries? Until 3 days ago, when our quarterly inspection revealed irregularities in the sealed collection. Someone had been accessing documents without authorization. Whimsy dropped to his knees, peering at the stone flags beneath the writing surface. Tell me, Mother Superior, was Sister Scholastica the sort of woman to inspire homicidal impulses, or merely the usual convent jealousies? The abbess's composure wavered slightly. She was exacting. She managed both our archives and our accounts, and she possessed an unfortunate talent for discovering discrepancies others preferred to overlook. A dangerous gift, murmured Whimsy, rising and dusting his knees carefully. He stared thoughtfully at the pristine quill pen, then at the inkpot with its film of fresh liquid. Most curious. The ink is wet, suggesting recent use, yet the pen nib is completely clean. One wonders why a woman writing her final words would pause to clean her pen before dying. It suggests priorities that transcend the usual human response to strychnine poisoning. Fenton shifted uncomfortably. What are you implying? Merely that tidiness, like virtue, can be carried to excess, said Whimsy softly, and that someone in this holy house possesses a most unholy knowledge of both poisons and human psychology. The convent's refectory had been pressed into service as an interview chamber, its long oak table scarred by centuries of communal meals now bearing the weight of more worldly concerns. Above them, a faded mural depicted the martyrdom of St. Agatha with that peculiar medieval enthusiasm for anatomical detail which suggests the artist had enjoyed his work rather more than was strictly devotional. Inspector Craven of the Kent Constabulary had arranged himself at the head of the table with the satisfied air of a man who has solved a murder before elevenses. His notebook lay open beside him, filled with what Whimsy suspected was more enthusiasm than accuracy. "We shall begin with the discovery," announced Whimsy, settling into a chair with the languid grace of a cat selecting the choicest spot by the fire. Sister Mary Joseph, I believe you brought the morning tea." The nun who entered possessed that weathered competence common to those who spend their days wrestling with both spiritual duties and practical necessities. Her hands bore the honest stains of garden work, and her eyes held the clarity of one accustomed to rising before dawn. "At 7:30 precisely, my lord." Sister Scholastica was most particular about punctuality. She said wasted time was a form of theft. From God and from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, both. "An admirably ecumenical approach to temporal management," murmured Whimsy. "And you found the door bolted from within?" "Yes, my lord, most unusual. The scriptorium doors are never locked during daylight hours." She paused, then added with careful precision, "I knocked several times. When there was no response, I set the tray upon the floor and fetched Mother Superior, who summoned Brother Anselm to apply his shoulder to the oak. And when the door yielded, what did you observe?" Sister Scholastica slumped over her writing desk. Her face was terrible, twisted. Her fingers were clenched around a piece of old parchment. The nun's composure wavered slightly. "I thought at first she had suffered an apoplexy. But Mother Superior diagnosed poison immediately," said Whimsy, glancing toward the abbess. "How remarkably astute." Mother Hildegard spoke quietly from her position near the window. "My brother was a physician, Lord Peter. I assisted him for 15 years before taking vows. I've seen strychnine poisoning twice before. The muscular convulsions and risus sardonicus are unmistakable." "How providentially medical of you." Whimsy made a note in his leather pocket-book. "Sister Mary Joseph, you mentioned that Sister Scholastica had been more particular than usual the previous day." "Indeed, my lord. She scolded me about leaving the milk jug too near the stove, and she sent Sister Agnes away from the scriptorium, though it was her day for cleaning there. Said there was delicate work that must not be disturbed. Sister Agnes was quite upset. She cried in the laundry afterwards." Before Whimsy could pursue this intriguing detail, Inspector Craven cleared his throat with the theatrical gravity of a man about to unveil his masterpiece. "Which brings us to our culprit," he announced, gesturing toward the pale young man huddled in the corner like a damp moth. "Mr. Julian Vane, lay archivist, been helping the sisters organize their collection for 6 months. A fox in the henhouse, if you ask me." Vane possessed that aesthetic dampness peculiar to forced rhubarb and eyes that darted about the room as if seeking escape routes. He looked considerably less like a cold-blooded murderer than a man who had recently been startled by an unexpectedly loud hymn. "I didn't do it," he bleated, his voice cracking with emotion. "She was a tyrant, yes, an absolute tyrant, but I didn't poison her." "You were heard arguing with the deceased yesterday afternoon," Craven continued triumphantly. "Sister Mary Joseph heard you shouting about ruining your reputation, and we found this in your lodging." He produced a small blue-glass bottle labeled in stark black letters. "Poison." "It's for my photography," Vane wailed, wringing his hands until the knuckles whitened. "I use it for toning prints. It's a standard chemical process." Whimsy examined the bottle with detached interest. Strychnine is indeed employed in certain photographic procedures, though usually by practitioners who prefer their landscapes with a hint of lethal potential. "The argument, Mr. Vane, was Sister Scholastica critiquing your artistic technique." Vane flushed an unbecoming shade of crimson. "She found a discrepancy in the inventory. She accused me of selling a 13th-century psalter to a collector in America. She said she was going to the bishop, that she would see me in prison." "So you silenced her," Craven concluded with evident satisfaction. "Slipped the powder into her tea, locked the door from the outside, was still working on the mechanics of that particular trick, and left her to die in agony." "I couldn't have," Vane protested. "Well, I was in the village, at the post office, sending a telegram to my mother. You can verify the time." Whimsy turned to gaze out the window, where Brother Anselm was conducting what appeared to be a personal vendetta against a rosebush. The solution offered by Inspector Craven possessed all the necessary dramatic elements, motive, means, and opportunity. It was, in fact, remarkably complete. And in Whimsy's considerable experience, murder was rarely so accommodatingly perfect. "Tell me, Mr. Vane," he said softly, not turning from the window, "when Sister Scholastica made her accusations, did she have the Henry VIII Concordat upon her desk?" "The what?" "No, my lord. She had the ledger, the accounts book. She never allowed anyone to touch the royal collection. She wore the key around her neck on a ribbon." Vane's voice took on a bitter edge. "She used to say it would only be opened over her dead body." "Precisely," murmured Whimsy, his reflection ghost-like in the ancient glass. And so it was. He turned back to the room, his monocle catching the light as he surveyed the assembled company. "Sister Mary Joseph, you mentioned that our garden maintains various preparations for pest control. Might these include nux vomica for the moles?" The nun paled visibly. "Yes, my lord. We keep it in the potting shed, along with arsenic for the rats." "How very convenient," said Whimsy thoughtfully. "A monastery garden that provides both spiritual contemplation and ready access to botanical strychnine. One begins to suspect that Providence has a rather dark sense of humor." Inspector Craven frowned. "What are you implying, my lord?" "Merely that when a case appears too perfect, as one must consider the possibility that perfection itself is the flaw," replied Whimsy, closing his notebook with a decisive snap. "Now then, I should very much like to examine this miraculous door that bolts itself from within, and perhaps have a word with the tearful Sister Agnes. Something tells me that yesterday's delicate work was rather more delicate than anyone has yet admitted." Sister Agnes, when summoned to the parlor, proved to be one of those women whom anxiety has compressed into a state of perpetual apology. She possessed the tremulous demeanor of a sparrow that has discovered cats can climb trees, and her hands worried constantly at the edges of her habit as though seeking reassurance from familiar textures. "I meant no harm, my lord," she began, before Whimsy had settled into his chair. "Sister Scholastica was always so particular about the scriptorium, and I only wished to be helpful." "An admirable impulse," murmured Whimsy, adjusting his monocle with that languid precision which generally preceded his most penetrating observations. "Perhaps you might illuminate the precise nature of this helpfulness. Sister Mary Joseph mentioned your rather abrupt dismissal yesterday morning." The nun's eyes filled with tears that threatened to overflow like an overfull teacup. "I was dusting near the royal collection cabinet, my lord. The door was slightly ajar, most unusual, as Sister Scholastica was meticulous about keeping it locked. When I approached to clean the area properly, she flew into such a rage. Said I was disturbing documents of national importance, asked that my carelessness could compromise centuries of trust between the Crown and our order." "Rather dramatic language for a bit of housekeeping," observed Whimsy. "Did you happen to glimpse what lay within this cabinet of state secrets?" Sister Agnes hesitated, her fingers working frantically at her rosary beads. "Only for a moment, my lord. There was an ancient parchment on the reading stand, very old with a red wax seal, but beside it was something quite modern, a notebook from a stationer's shop. Sister Scholastica appeared to be making copies. Transcriptions." Whimsy exchanged a meaningful glance with Bunter, who had positioned himself with such stillness that he might have been mistaken for an exceptionally well-dressed piece of furniture. "Transcriptions of sealed documents. How scholarly. And the key to this cabinet. Where did Sister Scholastica customarily keep it?" "Around her neck on a ribbon, always. She said it would only be removed over her dead body." Sister Agnes paused, struck by her own words. "But yesterday, when I saw her at the desk, the key was lying beside the ledger. I thought it most strange." "Indeed," said Whimsy softly. "Most strange, and most convenient for someone who required access to both the key and Sister Scholastica's person." He rose and began that measured pacing which invariably accompanied his deepest cogitations. "Tell me, Sister Agnes, had Sister Scholastica received any unusual visitors recently? Anyone from London, perhaps?" The nun's face brightened with the relief of one finally able to contribute something useful. "Oh yes, my lord. A distinguished gentleman came 3 weeks ago, silver-haired, with a motor car that made Brother Anselm quite envious. Mr. Threadgold, from a firm of solicitors in Lincoln's Inn. He was closeted with Sister Scholastica for nearly 2 hours." "Threadgold and Associates," murmured Whimsy. "Specialists in ecclesiastical law, and, if memory serves, representatives of several wealthy collectors in disputes over church property. How very illuminating. And Sister Scholastica's demeanor after this consultation?" "Quite transformed, my lord, almost triumphant. She hummed during Vespers, something she never did. Sister Catherine remarked that she hadn't seen Sister Scholastica so animated since the bishop commended her accounting methods." After dismissing Sister Agnes with gentle courtesy, as Whimsy proceeded to examine Sister Scholastica's cell with the methodical thoroughness of a customs inspector searching for contraband prayers. The chamber's austerity was broken only by a small shelf of books that revealed an eclectic taste. Thomas à Kempis nestled beside a medical text on toxicology and a thoroughly thumbed volume on double-entry bookkeeping. "An ascetic with a passion for figures and poisons," remarked Whimsy, positively medieval in her enthusiasms. Bunter, who had been silently examining the washstand, coughed discreetly. "If your lordship will observe, the water jug contains a bitter residue, and the glass bears crystalline deposits." Whimsy sniffed delicately at both vessels. "Our familiar friend Nux vomica. It appears Sister Scholastica was in the habit of taking medicinal draughts of a rather flexible nature, most convenient for someone familiar with her routines." Their investigation of the scriptorium door proved equally revelatory. Whimsy spent considerable time examining the heavy oak portal and its substantial iron bolt, much to Inspector Craven's evident impatience. "The mechanism is sound," he announced finally, "but observe the floorboards here. Minute fibers caught in the crack, and this clock—" He gestured toward the large timepiece on the wall, which read 12:15. "Sister Mary Joseph discovered the body at 7:30. Why has it stopped?" "Ran down, I expect," Craven shrugged. "Sister Scholastica, the woman who regarded punctuality as a moral virtue?" Whimsy opened the clock case and turned the key. It engaged perfectly. It was stopped deliberately, perhaps to confuse the timeline, or perhaps because the sound became unbearable to nerves under assault. In the cloister garden, Brother Anselm provided another piece of the temporal puzzle. The large monk, currently engaged in what appeared to be personal warfare against a rosebush, confirmed that he had been working within sight of the scriptorium all morning. "Heard nothing but birds and wind," he grunted, "except the Angelus bell. Rang early yesterday, maybe 10 minutes early. Thought Brother Thomas had been at the communion wine." 10 minutes early," Whimsy repeated thoughtfully. "A stopped clock inside, an early bell outside. Time seems remarkably elastic at St. Agatha's." "And the curtains?" Whimsy inquired. "Were they drawn across the scriptorium windows?" "Aye, shut tight as a drum. I thought it strange. Sister Scholastica always said God's light was best for God's work." As they prepared to depart, Mother Superior Hildegard approached with the measured tread of one bearing unwelcome news. "There is something else you should know, Lord Peter. Sister Scholastica came to me 10 days ago, greatly agitated. She believed there was a thief in the convent." "Of souls or silver?" inquired Whimsy. "Of history," replied the abbess grimly. She claimed someone was altering the records, not merely stealing documents, but changing them. "Rewriting God's ledger," she called it. She suspected that certain items in our collection were not entirely authentic. Whimsy's monocle glinted as he absorbed this final revelation. So we have a nun who discovers forgery, a solicitor who specializes in property disputes, transcriptions of sealed documents, and a death timed with mathematical precision. It begins to appear that Sister Scholastica stumbled upon something considerably more valuable than medieval parchment. She discovered someone converting history into currency. He turned to Bunter with that particular smile which generally preceded either brilliant deduction or spectacular disaster. "I think, Bunter, we must pay an urgent call upon Mr. Threadgold. Something tells me that our late sister was engaged in negotiations that would have scandalized both Henry VIII and the current Treasury in equal measure." The chambers of Threadgold and Associates occupied that portion of Lincoln's Inn where respectability had achieved the consistency of well-aged port and proved equally intoxicating to those who imbibed too freely of its atmosphere. And the rain, falling with that particular London persistence which suggests the heavens have embraced bureaucracy as a governing principle, drummed against windows that had witnessed more legal machinations than a papal conclave. Mr. Jasper Threadgold rose from behind a desk of such imposing mahogany that one suspected it had been hewn from trees that died of natural dignity. He possessed that silver-haired distinction which comes to men who have spent decades converting other people's moral complexities into billable hours, though his eyes held a wariness that suggested Lord Peter's reputation had preceded him. The solicitor's revelations. "Lord Peter Wimsey," Threadgold intoned, his voice carrying the measured cadence of one accustomed to weighing each word for its potential liability. "I confess I anticipated this visit following the distressing news from St. Agatha's. Sister Scholastica was a most formidable woman." "Formidable enough to inspire homicidal impulses?" inquired Wimsey, settling into a leather chair that had absorbed the confidences of generations. "I understand you consulted with her regarding certain Tudor documents of a sensitive nature." Threadgold's fingers performed a delicate dance with his fountain pen, a gesture that spoke of professional nervousness. The matter was indeed delicate. Sister Scholastica had discovered irregularities in the convent's financial position, charitable obligations that exceeded their endowment considerably. She approached me regarding the potential monetization of certain historical documents in their collection. "How admirably pragmatic," murmured Wimsey. "And selling Henry VIII's indiscretions to fund God's work. The irony would have delighted the old monster. But something troubled our late sister, didn't it? Something beyond mere financial concerns." The solicitor moved to his window, presenting his back in that universal gesture of men who find direct eye contact incompatible with complete honesty. She suspected that certain documents in the royal collection were not entirely authentic. During our consultation, she mentioned discrepancies between her current inventory and records dating from the 18th century. Items that should have existed no longer matched their historical descriptions. "Forgeries," said Wimsey flatly. Someone had been systematically replacing originals with cunningly aged copies, and Sister Scholastica, with her accountant's eye for discrepancies, had begun to notice the substitutions. Threadgold turned sharply. If such were the case, the implications would be catastrophic. My reputation depends entirely upon the authentication of genuine materials. Any suggestion of complicity in fraud would destroy me professionally. The Vane connection. Which brings us to young Mr. Julian Vane, continued Wimsey, producing his cigarette case with that languid precision which generally preceded his most penetrating observations. "I suspect he consulted you before Sister Scholastica ever darkened your doorway." The admission came reluctantly, like a confession extracted by skilled interrogation. "He came to me 6 weeks ago. Brought photographs of various documents, claimed to be researching a scholarly work on monastic collections, asked detailed questions about market values, some authentication procedures, the sort of documentation required for international sales." "How very academic of him," said Wimsey dryly. and you, naturally, provided him with precisely the information necessary to understand which items would command the highest prices from American collectors. I thought nothing improper at the time. Such enquiries are commonplace among legitimate scholars. It was only when Sister Scholastica contacted me with her concerns about authenticity that I began to wonder whether Mr. Vane's interests might extend beyond pure scholarship. Whimsy rose, collecting his hat and gloves with the air of a man who has confirmed a suspicion while discovering a deeper puzzle. One final question, Mr. Threadgold. When Sister Scholastica consulted you, did she mention any physical ailments? Digestive distress, perhaps? Or nervous symptoms? The solicitor frowned thoughtfully. Now that you mention it, she did complain of stomach pains that had persisted for several days. She attributed them to the stress of her discoveries, though she made a rather macabre jest about someone attempting to poison her. Said it reminded her of something from a medieval chronicle. Returned to St. Agatha's. The drive back to Kent provided Whimsy with ample opportunity for reflection, though his observations to Bunter suggested his thoughts were crystallizing around a theory of considerable complexity. Gradual poisoning, Bunter, he said as the Daimler navigated the marsh roads. Small doses of strychnine administered over several days, conditioning the system before the final, fatal draft. It explains Sister Scholastica's recent complaints of illness, and it requires someone with intimate knowledge of her daily routines. The garden shed contains Nux vomica for pest control, Bunter observed. Access would present no difficulties for anyone familiar with the convent's grounds. Precisely, and it suggests a murderer with both patience and medical knowledge. Someone who understood that chronic exposure would mask the symptoms until the final dose overwhelmed the victim's system. Their return to St. Agatha's revealed an atmosphere of heightened tension. Inspector Craven had discovered traces of strychnine among Julian Vane's photographic chemicals, a development that had satisfied his desire for a tidy conclusion, while leaving Whimsy increasingly skeptical of the obvious solution. Physical evidence and mechanical mysteries, the scriptorium, though now silent and shadowed in the late afternoon light, yielded fresh revelations under Whimsy's methodical examination. He approached the cold fireplace with the intensity of an archaeologist excavating a particularly promising tomb. "Bunter, your torch, if you please. I wish to examine the chimney." The beam illuminated the sooty interior, revealing a small iron hook mounted just above the damper, with traces of wire still attached to its mechanism. "A pulley system," Whimsy announced, emerging with his usually immaculate appearance somewhat compromised by soot. Something was lowered down this chimney, or perhaps drawn up through it, and observe the hearth. These scratch marks on the stone suggest the fire screen has been moved recently and rather hastily. He turned his attention to the writing desk, examining the inkpot with his magnifying glass. Minute traces of red sealing wax around the rim, Bunter. Sister Scholastica was not writing when she died. She was sealing a document that has since vanished. The parchment found in her hand, my lord, was a decoy, carefully placed to suggest she died protecting the Henry Concordat. But the real prize, whatever she was preparing for Threadgold's mysterious client, disappeared through that chimney. Someone used the fireplace as a postal system, raising and lowering documents while the room remained locked. The timeline deception. Whimsy's examination of the stopped clock revealed further evidence of temporal manipulation. 12:15, Bunter. Yet Sister Mary Joseph discovered the body at 7:30. 7 hours unaccounted for, in a room that should have been freezing cold, yet the fireplace shows no evidence of recent use. The early bell that Brother Anselm mentioned, my lord. Perhaps it was intended to confuse the timeline. Exactly. Someone has been playing elaborate games with time itself. The stopped clock inside, the early Angelus bell outside, the locked door that somehow bolted itself, all designed to create an impossible chronology that would baffle investigators. He moved to the heavy velvet curtains, testing their thickness. Soundproof as well as lightproof. If one were to scream in here, the stone walls would contain the sound completely. Our murderer could take their time, arrange the scene with theatrical precision, then vanish through their mechanical postal system. Whimsy's growing understanding. As they prepared to leave the scriptorium, Whimsy paused at the threshold, his monocle catching the dying light as he surveyed the chamber where Sister Scholastica had met her carefully orchestrated end. The pieces begin to form a pattern, Bunter. Document forgery conducted over months, gradual poisoning administered with medical precision, and a locked room mystery solved through medieval engineering. Someone at St. Agatha's possesses a most unholy combination of historical knowledge, chemical expertise, and mechanical ingenuity. Young Mr. Vane, my lord. Vane is certainly guilty of avarice and possibly of theft, but murder requires a peculiar marriage of desperation and calculation that I have not observed in our damp young archivist. No, someone else orchestrated Sister Scholastica's death with the precision of a Swiss clockmaker, then arranged for suspicion to fall upon the obvious suspect. He glanced back at the scriptorium, where shadows were gathering like conspirators in the corners. Tomorrow, Bunter, we shall conduct a rather different sort of investigation. Someone in this holy house has been playing God with both history and human life, and I suspect they are not yet finished with their divine comedy. The question remains, who among the good sisters and brothers possesses the knowledge to forge Tudor documents, the skill to manipulate strychnine dosages, and the ingenuity to commit murder in a locked room? The answer, Whimsy reflected as they walked through the cloister, lay not in the obvious guilt of Julian Vane, but in the careful observation of those who had remained above suspicion, those whose very sanctity provided the perfect camouflage for the most unholy of crimes. Morning prayers at St. Agatha's possessed that peculiar quality of devotion which suggests the participants are addressing their petitions to an auditor rather than the Almighty. The chapel, with its Norman arches and centuries of accumulated piety, seemed to compress the assembled community into a tableau of suspect sanctity that would have fascinated a medieval moralist. Whimsy, observing from the visitors' gallery with Bunter positioned strategically behind a Gothic pillar, noted the distribution of the community with the eye of a general surveying a battlefield where the casualties had not yet been declared. Mother Superior Hildegard led the responses with mechanical precision, while Sister Mary Joseph sang with that robust enthusiasm which suggests faith tempered by practical experience with recalcitrant drains and garden pests. Sister Agnes wept quietly into her handkerchief, a performance that struck Whimsy as rather too theatrical for genuine grief. But it was Sister Catherine, positioned in the shadows near the Lady Chapel, who commanded his particular attention. She possessed that quality of stillness which suggests either profound contemplation or profound calculation, and her eyes, when they lifted during the Kyrie, held an intelligence that seemed oddly at variance with her humble position as the convent's herbalist. The infirmary investigation. After the service concluded, Whimsy contrived to encounter Sister Catherine in the cloister garden, where she was gathering specimens from the medicinal beds with the practiced efficiency of one who knows precisely which plants heal and which destroy. The morning light caught the purple bells of foxglove in her basket, their beauty masking a toxicity that could stop a heart with mathematical precision. "Sister Catherine," he began, affecting that tone of idle curiosity which generally preceded his most pointed inquiries. "I understand you maintain the convent's pharmacy, a considerable responsibility, managing substances that can cure or kill with equal facility." She straightened slowly, her hands still holding the dangerous blooms. "God provides the remedies, my lord. I merely prepare them according to the old formularies." Sister Scholastica consulted me frequently regarding her digestive complaints in recent weeks. "Did she indeed? And what did you prescribe for these mysterious ailments?" "Chamomile tea, primarily, with small amounts of valerian for her nerves." She had become increasingly agitated. The burden of her discoveries weighed heavily upon her conscience. Sister Catherine's voice carried that careful neutrality which comes to those who have rehearsed their explanations thoroughly. Whimsy examined a specimen of monkshood with detached interest, noting its proximity to the more benign herbs. You were trained in pharmacy before taking vows, I understand. 15 years at a teaching hospital in Edinburgh, according to Sister Mary Joseph. A flicker of something, pride, perhaps, or wariness, crossed Sister Catherine's features. I assisted in the dispensary and occasionally in the surgical theater. When my brother died and left me without family, I sought refuge here. My skills have proven useful to the community. And to Sister Scholastica, who required increasingly frequent remedies for her ailments. Whimsy's monocle acquired that particular glint which suggested his mind was performing calculations of a most uncomfortable nature. Tell me, sister, in your medical experience, would you say that strychnine poisoning presents differently when administered in small, cumulative doses rather than a single, lethal draught? The confession. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Sister Catherine's hands tightened imperceptibly on her basket, crushing the foxglove stems until their poisonous sap stained her fingers. "Since the symptoms would develop gradually," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. Muscular stiffness, digestive distress, heightened nervous sensitivity. The victim might attribute them to natural illness until the final dose overwhelmed the system's capacity for resistance. "How very clinical," murmured Whimsy. "And if one wished to disguise such poisoning, one might prescribe remedies that would mask the early symptoms while actually contributing to the cumulative effect. Valerian shares certain alkaloid properties with strychnine in sufficient quantities." Sister Catherine met his gaze directly, and in that moment Whimsy saw the woman she had been before the veil. Intelligent, capable, and possessing that dangerous quality of absolute certainty in her own righteousness. Sister Scholastica was destroying this community. Lord Peter. The words came with the force of long-suppressed confession. She had discovered that certain charitable obligations recorded in our ledgers were fictitious. Money that should have gone to the poor had been redirected for years to maintain our collection, to fund our scholarly reputation. She intended to expose the matter to the bishop, to bring scandal upon St. Agatha's and ruin us all. "And so you decided to play physician to her final illness," said Whimsy softly. "Small doses in her chamomile tea, building toward the inevitable conclusion. But someone else discovered your intentions and decided to accelerate the process, didn't they? Someone who required Sister Scholastica's death to occur on a specific schedule before she could complete her transaction with Mr. Threadgold." Sister Catherine's composure cracked like porcelain subjected to sudden temperature change. "I never meant for it to happen that way. The final dose, it wasn't mine. Someone else administered it, someone who knew what I'd been doing and decided to finish what I had begun with theatrical efficiency." She sank onto a stone bench, her basket tumbling forgotten to the path. The foxgloves scattered across the flagstones like purple accusations, their poison bells silent in the morning air. "The engineering connection. Then we must discover," said Whimsy, "who among your holy community possesses both the knowledge of your poisoning campaign and the technical skills to transform it into a locked-room mystery." He turned toward the garden shed, where Brother Anselm was visible through the window, attending to his botanical charges with mechanical precision. Their subsequent interview with Mother Superior Hildegard in the cloister walk provided the missing piece of the technical puzzle. The abbess appeared more drawn than usual, the strain of the investigation etching deeper lines around her eyes as she confirmed Whimsy's growing suspicions. Brother Anselm was an engineer before taking his vows. She revealed when pressed with the railways, he designed signaling mechanisms, pulleys, levers, precise timing systems before the accident that led him to seek refuge here. "Signaling mechanisms," repeated Whimsy thoughtfully. "And his relationship with Sister Scholastica." They argued frequently. She controlled the convent's finances, and she often denied his requests for expensive botanical specimens or new garden equipment, till she called his exotic plants a vanity, a waste of resources that should go to the poor. Whimsy's synthesis. Whimsy regarded the bell tower rising stark against the morning sky, his mind assembling the components of a conspiracy that had operated with clockwork precision. We have, then, a most unholy collaboration. Sister Catherine, motivated by misguided loyalty to the community, began the slow murder of Sister Scholastica through cumulative poisoning. But Brother Anselm, with his engineering knowledge and access to the scriptorium's chimney system, recognized both the opportunity and the necessity for a more dramatic conclusion. He turned to Bunter with that expression which generally preceded either brilliant deduction or spectacular disaster. The pulley system in the fireplace, the stopped clock, and the early Angelus bell all require the technical expertise of someone familiar with mechanical timing. Brother Anselm could have lowered the final, massive dose of strychnine down the chimney, along with whatever document Sister Scholastica was preparing for Threadgold's client. He then used his engineering skills to create the locked room illusion, while Sister Catherine's gradual poisoning provided the perfect cover for the murder method. "But surely," protested Mother Superior Hildegard, "Brother Anselm is a man of God." "Even men of God have pasts, Mother Superior. And when those pasts involve valuable documents and American collectors willing to pay substantial sums for authenticated historical materials, then divine calling can prove remarkably flexible in its interpretation." Whimsy collected his hat and gloves with the air of a man who has confirmed one suspicion while discovering a deeper puzzle. "I suspect we shall find that our gardening monk has been cultivating more than exotic plants in his potting shed. The question now becomes whether we are dealing with a simple partnership between a poisoner and an engineer, or something far more complex, a conspiracy that reaches beyond these walls to the very collectors who would profit from Henry VIII's correspondence." He paused at the garden gate, watching Brother Anselm's methodical movements among his botanical specimens. "Tomorrow, Bunter, we shall examine that potting shed with considerable care. I have a feeling that beneath its innocent exterior, we shall discover the true workshop of our mechanical murderer, complete with pulleys, timing devices, and perhaps a few documents that should have remained in the royal collection forever." The morning mist was lifting from the marshes, revealing the ancient landscape in sharp detail. But at St. Agatha's, Whimsy reflected, the fog of deception was only beginning to clear, and the full extent of the conspiracy remained hidden in shadows that would require considerably more illumination to dispel. The potting shed of St. Agatha's occupied that peculiar territory between utility and sanctity, where English monasticism had learned to accommodate the practical necessities of pest control alongside the theoretical demands of Christian charity. Its weathered timber frame exhaled the accumulated scents of bone meal, linseed oil, even something sharper that suggested Brother Anselm's horticultural methods extended beyond mere organic gardening into realms that would have fascinated a medieval alchemist. The workshop of deception. Whimsy approached the shed with that deceptive languor which generally preceded his most acute observations, noting the monk's massive frame silhouetted against the morning light, like a figure from a morality play who had forgotten which virtue he was supposed to represent. Brother Anselm clutched a pair of pruning shears with the defensive grip of one who has discovered that his private correspondence is being examined by unwelcome visitors. "Brother Anselm," began Whimsy, adjusting his monocle to examine a coil of fine copper wire suspended from a nail. Rather sophisticated material for training sweet peas. So in this mechanism here, he indicated a small device of gears and levers partially concealed within a dismantled watering can. Looks remarkably like the escapement from a railway signal box. Most curious equipment for a gardener devoted to spiritual contemplation. The monk's jaw tightened perceptibly, though his voice maintained the flat humility expected of his station. "I repair things for the community, my lord. Clocks, locks, whatever requires attention. It is part of my service to God." "And occasionally," murmured Whimsy, lifting a brass pulley from beneath a stack of seed catalogues, "you repair the inconvenient timeline of murder itself. This wire gauge matches exactly the fibers we discovered in the scriptorium chimney. The workbench bears traces of red sealing wax identical to that found on Sister Scholastica's ink pot. And this timing mechanism," he examined the device with professional appreciation, "could lower or raise objects at predetermined intervals with mathematical precision." Bunter, who had been conducting his own methodical examination of the shed's contents, coughed discreetly. "If your lordship will observe the rear wall, the soil has been recently disturbed, and there are fragments of charred parchment mixed with the earth. The ashes contain traces of Tudor script and red wax seals." The engineering revelation. Brother Anselm set down his shears with exaggerated care, his massive hands trembling slightly as the weight of discovery settled upon him like a hair shirt designed by a particularly vindictive saint. "You understand nothing of what was at stake," he said finally, and his Lancashire accent becoming more pronounced as emotion overcame years of enforced refinement. "Then enlighten us," said Whimsy pleasantly. "I understand you were an engineer before taking vows. With the railways, designing signaling mechanisms and timing systems, skills that would prove remarkably adaptable to the requirements of murder by remote control." The monk's composure cracked like poorly fired pottery subjected to sudden temperature change. 23 years with the London and North Western. Designed the automatic signaling system for the Manchester-Liverpool line. Before the accident that killed my wife and brought me here, seeking redemption. His voice carried the bitter edge of one who has discovered that salvation comes with a considerably higher price than anticipated. "And you found that your particular talents had unexpected applications in a monastery, with valuable documents and pressing financial needs," continued Whimsy. "The convent was desperate for funds, wasn't it? The roof repairs, the heating system, the charitable obligations that Sister Scholastica managed with such meticulous attention to detail." Brother Anselm moved to the window, presenting his back in that universal gesture of men who find direct confession easier when avoiding eye contact. "St. Agatha's was dying, Lord Peter, slowly, quietly, but dying nonetheless. The endowment barely covered basic maintenance, let alone the charitable works we were founded to perform. As when I realized what treasures lay in the royal collection, documents that American collectors would pay fortunes to possess, I saw a way to save everything we held sacred. The mechanical murder. So you began replacing originals with forgeries," said Whimsy, examining the pulley system with that mixture of fascination and distaste which attends the discovery of particularly elegant crimes. "Your railway experience included creating technical drawings and documentation, skills that translated admirably to medieval manuscript reproduction. But Sister Scholastica, with her accountant's eye for discrepancies, began to notice that your copies didn't match the historical descriptions in the 18th century inventories. She was going to expose everything," Brother Anselm said heavily. "The Henry Concordat was already promised to an American collector, Mr. Cornelius Blackwood. The sale would have funded our charitable works for years, allowed us to repair the roof, modernize the heating, continue serving the poor. But she couldn't see beyond her narrow interpretation of stewardship." Whimsy traced the wire from the shed window to where it disappeared over the roof toward the scriptorium. "So when Sister Catherine began her gradual poisoning campaign, motivated by her own misguided loyalty to the community, you recognized the perfect opportunity. Her small doses of strychnine in the chamomile tea were weakening Sister Scholastica, creating symptoms that would mask your more dramatic conclusion." "I never intended for Catherine to begin her foolishness," the monk protested. "But when I realized what she was doing, and I saw how it could serve a greater purpose, the gradual poisoning provided the perfect cover. Everyone would assume the final dose was simply the culmination of her amateur efforts." The timeline manipulation. Whimsy examined the timing mechanism with professional appreciation. You use this device to lower the final, massive dose of strychnine down the chimney at precisely the right moment, while Sister Scholastica was sealing the document she intended to send to Threadgold for authentication. The same mechanism retrieved both the original concordat and whatever evidence might have implicated you. The timing had to be perfect. Brother Anselm admitted with something approaching professional pride. I rang the Angelus bell 10 minutes early to confuse the timeline, stopped the scriptorium clock to create additional temporal confusion, and then activated the pulley system from here. The strychnine was delivered directly into a teacup while she worked, and the mechanism retrieved the sealed document before rigor mortis could set in. Most ingenious, murmured Whimsy. The locked door from within, the impossible timeline, the stopped clock, all designed to create a mystery that would baffle investigators while the real crime remained hidden. You transformed Sister Catherine's clumsy attempt at gradual murder into a locked room impossibility that would focus attention on the mechanical puzzle rather than the simple motive of theft and forgery. Sister Catherine's unwitting role. As Inspector Craven arrived with constables to take Brother Anselm into custody, Whimsy reflected on the tragic irony that had transformed two well-intentioned servants of God into unwitting collaborators in murder. Sister Catherine, motivated by loyalty to her community, had begun a poisoning campaign that she believed would merely incapacitate Sister Scholastica long enough to prevent her from exposing the convent's financial irregularities. Brother Anselm, driven by his own interpretation of charitable necessity, had used her amateur efforts as cover for a crime of considerably greater sophistication and finality. The human capacity for moral rationalization, Whimsy observed to Bunter as they watched the monk being led away through the cloister, remains one of the most reliable constants in criminal behavior. Now, both perpetrators convinced themselves they were serving God while systematically violating every principle their faith represented. The broader conspiracy. The discovery of Brother Anselm's ledger in the bell tower revealed the true scope of the criminal enterprise. For 3 years, the monk had been systematically replacing items from the convent's collection with his own forgeries, selling the originals to American collectors through a network that included Julian Vane as an unwitting broker and Mr. Threadgold as a legitimate but naive authenticator. The tragedy, Whimsy reflected as they descended from the bell chamber, is that Sister Scholastica died protecting treasures that were already lost. The Henry Concordat she sealed with her dying breath was genuine, but it represented only a fraction of what had been stolen. And Brother Anselm had been converting centuries of accumulated history into liquid assets, one document at a time. The investigation would eventually reveal that Mr. Cornelius Blackwood's collection included not merely the promised concordat, but illuminated manuscripts, papal bulls, and royal letters that represented an irreplaceable archive of English ecclesiastical history. The financial salvation Brother Anselm had sought for St. Agatha's had come at the cost of the very heritage the convent had been founded to preserve. Whimsy's final reflection. As the Daimler carried them back toward London through the marsh country, Whimsy contemplated the peculiar psychology that had transformed a railway engineer into a forger-murderer and a trained nurse into a poisoner who believed herself an angel of mercy. And the case had revealed the dangerous intersection of financial desperation, technical expertise, and moral flexibility that could transform even the most sacred institutions into criminal enterprises. The irony, Bunter, he observed, watching the ancient landscape roll past the window, is that both Sister Catherine and Brother Anselm genuinely believed they were saving St. Agatha's. Instead, they destroyed the very trust that had sustained the community for centuries. They preserved the stones while selling the soul, and discovered too late that institutions, like individuals, cannot survive such fundamental corruption. The bells of St. Agatha's, ringing the evening angelus as they disappeared into the distance, carried a different resonance now. Not the call to prayer that had echoed across the marshes for centuries, but a funeral knell for trust betrayed and faith corrupted by the very human tendency to believe that good intentions can sanctify evil means. The Morning Post at 110, A Piccadilly, arrived with that particular quality of bureaucratic urgency, which suggests that His Majesty's government has discovered something it would prefer to forget. The envelope bore the Treasury seal and contained a communication from Mr. Fenton that managed to convey both official displeasure and personal bewilderment in equal measure. "Most illuminating, Bunter," observed Whimsy, setting down the letter with the air of a man who has just discovered that his morning crossword contains answers in a language that doesn't exist. "It appears that our Henry VIII Concordat has failed its examination by the palace archivists. And the document is genuine medieval parchment with authentic Tudor inks, but the text itself contains phraseology that didn't enter diplomatic usage until the 17th century. A forgery, my lord. A masterful one. Someone with considerable knowledge of paleography and diplomatic forms, but insufficient familiarity with the evolution of legal language. The sort of error that might escape casual inspection but would inevitably betray itself to genuine expertise." The Treasury revelation. Within the hour, Whimsy found himself once again in the austere chambers of the Treasury solicitor, where Mr. Fenton had arranged the evidence with the methodical precision of an undertaker preparing a particularly complicated funeral. And Inspector Craven occupied a chair with the deflated posture of a man whose neat solution has developed inconvenient complications. "The palace archivists are quite certain," Fenton announced without preamble. "The Concordat is an elaborate forgery, probably created within the last decade. But here lies our difficulty. According to 18th century records, an authentic agreement between Henry and St. Agatha's did once exist. It vanished from the Crown archives sometime before 1890, circumstances unknown." "So Brother Anselm was not merely stealing existing documents," murmured Whimsy, "but attempting to recreate something that had already been lost, rather like forging one's own death certificate. And who, pray tell, would possess sufficient knowledge of the original to attempt such a reconstruction?" Fenton consulted his notes with evident reluctance. "Only 3 people have examined the Crown's surviving references to the original Concordat in recent years. Myself, the keeper of the privy purse, and Mother Superior Hildegard, who visited in January at the bishop's request to verify certain claims regarding the convent's historical privileges." Inspector Craven straightened with renewed interest. "The abbess herself? But she's the one who summoned us to investigate the murder." "Precisely," said Whimsy softly. "And in my considerable experience, those who discover crimes are occasionally those who commit them. It provides such convenient control over the investigation's direction." The medical connection, their return journey to St. Agatha's took them past the modest cottage that served as residence for Dr. Edmund Hartley, the convent's physician. Whimsy, who had noted the doctor's peripheral presence throughout their investigation without examining it closely, now regarded the dwelling with the focused attention of a cat observing a mouse that has suddenly revealed itself to be considerably larger than initially apparent. "Tell me, Bunter," he said as they approached the cottage door, "what do we actually know about our good Dr. Hartley, beyond his medical credentials and his convenient availability during our investigation?" "Very little, my lord. He maintains a small practice among the local gentry, has attended the convent for approximately 5 years, and possesses what Sister Mary Joseph described as a scholarly interest in old documents." She mentioned that he often borrowed volumes from the convent library. "Scholarly interest in old documents," repeated Whimsy thoughtfully. "How remarkably coincidental. One begins to suspect that St. Agatha's has attracted more historians than its medieval founders ever intended." Dr. Hartley received them in a study that immediately explained his scholarly reputation. The walls bore evidence of interests that extended far beyond general medical practice. Shelves of works on medieval history, paleography, and document authentication, alongside what appeared to be a comprehensive collection of auction catalogues from American dealers in historical manuscripts. Lord Peter, the doctor greeted them with carefully controlled composure. "I wondered when you would arrive. Your investigation has been most thorough, though I suspect you've been examining the symptoms rather than the disease itself." The true conspiracy revealed. An interesting medical metaphor, observed Whimsy, examining a particularly well-thumbed volume on Tudor diplomatic correspondence. "Perhaps you might diagnose the condition for us. What disease requires the systematic replacement of historical documents with carefully crafted forgeries?" Hartley moved to his desk, extracting a folder with the resigned air of a man who has carried a burden too long. "The disease of institutional poverty, Lord Peter. St. Agatha's has been dying slowly for decades. Inadequate endowment, crumbling buildings, charitable obligations that exceed their resources by thousands of pounds annually. When I realized what treasures lay neglected in their collection, I saw an opportunity to provide the treatment they desperately needed. Treatment that involved systematic theft and forgery," said Whimsy. "How therapeutic. And your connection to the American collectors who have been purchasing these treasures?" "My brother Cornelius operates one of the most respected galleries in Boston," Hartley admitted. "He specializes in English ecclesiastical materials, and he was prepared to pay extraordinary sums for authenticated items from St. Agatha's collection. The arrangement was intended to be mutually beneficial. The convent would receive desperately needed funds, and while historically significant materials would be preserved in a proper archival environment, rather than mouldering in a damp scriptorium where they might be discovered by inconveniently observant nuns," murmured Whimsy. "But Sister Scholastica's accounting methods proved incompatible with your therapeutic approach to institutional finance." The murder method. Hartley's composure began to crack like poorly mixed mortar subjected to sudden pressure. She was going to expose everything, not just the individual sales, but the entire network of collectors and dealers who have been systematically acquiring English ecclesiastical treasures for decades. The scandal would have destroyed institutions on both sides of the Atlantic. "So you decided to eliminate the threat using methods that would implicate your existing collaborators while concealing your own involvement," continued Whimsy. "Sister Catherine's gradual poisoning provided the perfect foundation, while Brother Anselm's mechanical expertise offered an ideal explanation for the locked room mystery." "I am a physician," Hartley said weakly. "I had access to Sister Scholastica's medical records, knowledge of her routines, understanding of the poison Sister Catherine was administering. When I realized what both of them were attempting independently, I saw how their separate crimes could be woven together to create a single, spectacular murder that would focus attention on their collaboration rather than my orchestration." Bunter, who had been conducting his characteristic methodical examination of the study, produced a small medical vial from behind a row of texts. "Concentrated strychnine solution, my lord. Sufficient to deliver a lethal dose in a few drops, easily administered during a routine medical visit." "No elaborate pulley systems required," said Whimsy. "Simply a physician treating a patient weakened by gradual poisoning, administering what appeared to be legitimate medication for her digestive complaints. You then used Brother Anselm's engineering notes to stage the locked room mystery after the fact, creating physical evidence that would implicate him while concealing your simpler, more direct method. The mechanical deception. The pulley system was real enough," Hartley confessed, his professional demeanor crumbling entirely. Brother Anselm had designed it for retrieving documents from the scriptorium without being observed by Sister Scholastica. I simply used it after administering the fatal dose to create the impression of mechanical murder, lowering prepared evidence through the chimney while arranging the scene to suggest impossible timing. And the stopped clock, the early bell, the theatrical staging? all designed to create temporal confusion and focus attention on mechanical impossibilities rather than medical probabilities. I knew that investigators would be fascinated by the engineering puzzle while overlooking the simple fact that a physician with access to concentrated poisons could kill with far less complexity than any mechanical system required. Whimsy's synthesis. As Inspector Craven arrived to take Dr. Hartley into custody, Whimsy reflected on the peculiar psychology that had transformed a healing professional into the architect of a conspiracy that had corrupted an entire religious community. The case had revealed not merely individual criminality, but a complex web of rationalization that had allowed 3 separate criminals to believe they were serving higher purposes while systematically destroying the values they claimed to protect. "The tragedy, Bunter," he observed as they departed the doctor's cottage, "is that each participant believed they were providing salvation, Brother Anselm saving his community through commerce, Sister Catherine protecting institutional reputation through elimination, and Dr. Hartley preserving historical treasures through systematic theft. Each crime was committed in service of an ideal, and yet together they created a conspiracy that destroyed the very trust that had sustained St. Agatha's for centuries." The marsh country rolled past in gathering twilight, its ancient landscape indifferent to the human dramas that had played out against its timeless backdrop. At St. Agatha's, the bells would continue to ring the hours, as they had for generations, but the harmony they had once celebrated had been replaced by the discord of betrayed faith and corrupted purpose. "Tomorrow, Bunter," said Whimsy as the convent's bell tower disappeared behind them, "we must return to tie up the remaining threads. Mother Superior Hildegard's visit to the Treasury Archives requires explanation, and I suspect we shall discover that even the most pious institutions are not immune to the peculiar human capacity for believing that good intentions can sanctify evil means." The Daimler carried them through the darkness toward London, leaving behind a community that would never again enjoy the innocence of unquestioned trust, and a mystery that had revealed the dangerous intersection of desperate need, technical expertise, and moral flexibility that could transform even the most sacred institutions into criminal enterprises. Chapter 9. 500 words without heading, no more, no less. Mixture of agents, GPT 5.1. Instant Claude Sonnet 4.5. Gemini 3. Pro Preview Reflection. Mother Superior Hildegard received them in the abbess's parlor with that particular gravity which suggests a soul prepared for martyrdom, provided the executioner observed proper ecclesiastical forms. The morning light, filtering through centuries-old glass, cast her shadow across the mahogany desk like a sundial marking the final hours of institutional innocence. The Treasury Deception. "You visited the Crown Archives in January," began Whimsy without preamble, producing a photographic plate that Bunter had discovered among Dr. Hartley's effects. Not merely to consult references, but to photograph specific passages, diplomatic phraseology, seal impressions, the precise format of Tudor legal documents. Rather thorough research for someone seeking diocesan support. The abbess's fingers tightened on her rosary, though her voice maintained its customary authority. "I did what was necessary to save this community, Lord Peter. 7 centuries of service to God and the poor, as yet we were dying from financial starvation. The roof leaked, the heating failed, our charitable work suspended for lack of funds. So you provided Brother Anselm with the historical framework necessary to create convincing forgeries," continued Whimsy, adjusting his monocle with prosecutorial precision. "Your 15 years of medical training also proved invaluable when Sister Catherine began her amateur poisoning campaign. You recognized the symptoms, didn't you? The gradual strychnine exposure that Dr. Hartley later exploited for his more definitive solution." The confession. "I suspected Catherine's involvement," Hildegard admitted, her medical training evident in the clinical precision of her confession. "I warned her such methods were both sinful and dangerous. But when Sister Scholastica discovered the discrepancies in our collection, items that didn't match historical inventories, exposure became imminent. Dr. Hartley convinced me he would handle the matter, quietly, by transforming Catherine's clumsy attempts into precisely calculated murder, said Whimsy. Using your medical knowledge of the victim's condition and your authorization of the forgery network to create a conspiracy that would implicate your entire senior staff while protecting the lucrative American connections. The final irony. Bunter stepped forward with a leather case retrieved from the abbess's private safe. Within lay a collection of documents that should have been sold to American collectors, except these were unmistakably genuine. Most illuminating, Bunter, observed Whimsy. Brother Anselm proved a more accomplished forger than anyone realized. The items sold to Mr. Blackwood were the forgeries. The originals never left St. Agatha's. The abbess closed her eyes, tears finally escaping her iron control. We never sold our heritage, Lord Peter, only the illusion of it. I thought it was a sin we could live with, deceiving collectors to feed the poor. But the deception grew until it consumed us all. Whimsy's judgment. The tragedy, said Whimsy quietly as Inspector Craven arrived to escort her away, is that your conspiracy began with an exception, a small bending of principle to meet urgent need. After that, events proceeded with the remorseless logic of a Greek tragedy. You sought to preserve your institution by betraying its foundational principles. It's discovering too late that some compromises destroy the very thing they mean to save. As the Daimler carried them through the marsh country for the final time, Whimsy reflected on a mystery where the solution lay not in mechanical impossibilities, but in the dangerous human capacity for believing that good intentions can sanctify evil means. A belief that had transformed a sanctuary into the stage for the most unholy of crimes. The drawing room at 110 of Piccadilly possessed that quality of civilized refuge which suggests humanity has temporarily achieved victory over chaos, though the victory remains subject to appeal by higher courts. Whimsy occupied his customary chair beside a fire that crackled with the satisfied air of wood that has fulfilled its destiny, while Bunter arranged the final documents of the saint. To Agatha's affair with the methodical precision of a librarian cataloguing the decline of Western civilization. The complete resolution. The essential difficulty, observed Whimsy, adjusting his monocle to examine a photograph of the scriptorium's pulley mechanism, was that we were presented with 3 separate crimes masquerading as a single conspiracy. Sister Catherine's gradual poisoning, Brother Anselm's systematic forgery, and Dr. Hartley's opportunistic murder, each operating with independent motives until circumstances wove them into a theatrical masterpiece of spectacular complexity. Parker, who had arrived to collect the official reports for the Crown Prosecutor, settled into the opposing chair with the weary satisfaction of a man who has finally understood a particularly obtuse crossword clue. But the actual murder method. How did Hartley manage the locked room illusion? There was no locked room, my dear Parker. That was the fundamental misdirection. Whimsy rose to pace before the fireplace, that characteristic gesture which invariably preceded his most comprehensive explanations. Dr. Hartley administered the fatal dose during what appeared to be a routine medical consultation. Sister Scholastica had been complaining of digestive distress for 10 days, symptoms that Hartley immediately recognized as strychnine poisoning from Sister Catherine's amateur efforts. The chronological reconstruction. Whimsy moved to his desk, where Bunter had arranged a precise timeline illustrated with photographs and documents. Consider the sequence without the deliberate obfuscations. At 9:15 yesterday morning, Doctor, Hartley arrived for his weekly visit to treat Sister Scholastica's digestive complaints. He found her weakened by 10 days of gradual poisoning, her system primed to accept a massive dose that would prove immediately fatal. He administered the strychnine in what appeared to be legitimate medication, Parker observed. Precisely. A concentrated solution in what Sister Scholastica believed was a digestive remedy. The convulsions began within minutes, but Hartley remained to ensure the theatrical staging was complete. He used Brother Anselm's pulley system, originally designed for retrieving documents without Sister Scholastica's knowledge, to lower the forged concordat into her dying grasp while removing any evidence of his medical visit. The mechanical misdirection, the stopped clock, the early Angelus bell, so the bolted door, all were arranged after the murder to create temporal confusion and suggest mechanical impossibility. When Sister Mary Joseph discovered the body at 7:30, she found the scriptorium door unbolted. Her entirely innocent action of securing it before summoning help created the locked room mystery that would baffle investigators. Bunter coughed discreetly. The irony, my lord, is that Brother Anselm's engineering skills were used against him. Dr. Hartley employed the monk's own pulley system to create evidence that would implicate him in a murder he never committed. The network of deception. Each participant believed they were protecting separate interests, Whimsy continued, returning to his chair with the air of a conductor who has successfully navigated a particularly complex symphony. Mother Superior Hildegard authorized the forgery network to save her financially desperate community. Brother Anselm created masterful reproductions to fund charitable works while preserving the originals. Sister Catherine attempted gradual murder to protect institutional reputation, and Dr. Hartley orchestrated the final killing to protect a commercial network that had corrupted scholarship on 2 continents. Parker consulted his notes with evident fascination. The Treasury investigation reveals that American collectors have been purchasing forgeries for 3 years, believing them authentic Tudor documents. Several scholarly papers have been published based on Brother Anselm's reproductions. Academic reputation built upon elegant lies, murmured Whimsy. Rather appropriate for an affair that began with institutional desperation and ended in comprehensive moral collapse. The institutional aftermath. 3 weeks later, as London's autumn fog settled over Piccadilly with its customary determination to obscure uncomfortable truths, a small package arrived bearing a Boston postmark. It contained an exquisite reproduction of a Tudor land grant and a note from Mr. Cornelius Blackwood expressing his profound appreciation for the artistic excellence of English monastic craftsmanship. It appears our American friends have chosen to appreciate their purchases as art rather than history, observed Whimsy, examining the document with professional admiration. A pragmatic solution to an embarrassing international incident. The originals remain at St. Agatha's, and the reproductions grace American galleries, and the truth reposes safely in Treasury files where it can do no further damage to diplomatic relations. "And the convent itself, my lord?" inquired Bunter, arranging the morning correspondence with his characteristic precision. "Under new management, I understand. A contemplative order of Carmelites has assumed residence, silent meditation, no historical archives, and absolutely no gardening beyond the cultivation of vegetables for the soup kitchen, a sensible precaution against the temptations of both history and horticulture." Whimsy's final reflection. The Evening Post brought news of the trial's conclusion. Dr. Hartley sentenced to life imprisonment, Mother Superior Hildegard to 10 years for conspiracy, Brother Anselm to 7 years for forgery, Arch and Sister Catherine to 5 years for attempted murder. The sentences possessed that quality of judicial tidiness which suggests justice has been served, though whether it has been achieved remains a matter for theological rather than legal determination. The tragedy, Whimsy reflected, watching the London traffic flow past his window with its ceaseless, indifferent rhythm, is that Sister Scholastica died protecting authenticity in a world that had already chosen comfortable deception over uncomfortable truth. She recognized that some principles cannot be compromised without destroying the institutions they were meant to preserve. A profound observation, my lord. or merely the recognition that humanity possesses an infinite capacity for believing that good intentions can sanctify evil means, a belief that transforms sanctuaries into crime scenes and transforms scholars into forgers with depressing regularity. He moved to pour himself a brandy from the decanter that had witnessed more confessions than most priests. It reminds one of that line from Measure for Measure, Bunter. Some rise by sin, and some by virtue fall. At St. Agatha's, they managed both simultaneously, a theological accomplishment of considerable complexity. The philosophical conclusion. As the bells of London's churches began their evening chorus across the city, Miss Whimsy reflected that they carried no echo of the marsh country convent where faith had been corrupted by financial desperation and trust destroyed by moral compromise. The community would continue its work under new leadership, the scandal carefully contained by ecclesiastical discretion and governmental expediency. The human capacity for moral rationalization, he observed to Bunter as they prepared for dinner, remains one of the most reliable constants in criminal behavior. Each of our conspirators convinced themselves they were serving God, while systematically violating every principle their faith represented. They sought to preserve their institution by betraying its foundational values, discovering too late that some compromises destroy the very thing they mean to save. Will that be all for this evening, my lord? Yes, Bunter. And I believe I shall retire early with a volume of completely fictional crime. Something reassuringly straightforward involving pirates or international jewel thieves. Reality has become rather too inventive for my taste, and I find myself yearning for the simple moral certainties of imaginary villainy. The fog thickened outside the windows of 110A Piccadilly, wrapping London in its familiar embrace of ambiguity and concealment. But within the warmth of the drawing-room, Lord Peter Wimsey had once again imposed order upon chaos, though he remained sufficiently wise to recognize that such victories are always temporary, and that human nature will inevitably provide fresh mysteries for those patient enough to observe its infinite capacity for self-deception in service of the highest ideals.